Hey folks, BlackCross here, and welcome to another review. Today's review, I figured we'd talk about one other game that I've been wanting to play for a while, and that game being Metal Wolf Chaos XD. So let's go ahead and get into the history of this game before we get anywhere further in remotely when it comes to actually reviewing the game itself. Technically speaking, Metal Wolf Chaos was released for the Xbox system. Now, what's interesting about this particular game was that, despite the theming of the game, it was only ever released in Japan. What do I mean by the theme? Well, the story takes place in the US of A. Game about the United States of America, and it is only released in Japan. Well, isn't that just hunky-dory, guys, ain't it? So yeah, needless to say, a lot of people, a lot of collectors for that matter, thought this game out and was wanting it actually, to come out and stuff like that, but it never did. So, yeah, needless to say, we finally got the game, and how is it overall after waiting as long as people have waited for, and for it to finally come out remastered on the PS4 and Xbox One? How is the game? It's actually really good. No, really, it is actually really good. There is a lot, though, that needs to be talked about. So let's get into the riff of it all. So for starters, when it comes to Metal Wolf Chaos, basically it is a mech fighting game. Basically you control the mech and you go through levels in order to defeat or accomplish requirements needed in order to beat said mission, and you're doing a whole bunch of small stuff in the sidelines and stuff. With the story basically being that of, you play as the President of the United States of America, controlling a mech suit. That is like the ultimate story right there. It is like the President of the United States, the power to protect American citizens, has a prototype mech suit. Basically, the story is as campy as it gets, but not as nearly as campy as the overall arcing voice acting. I kid you not, this game, the voice acting is like, oh gosh. Now here's the funny thing, this voice acting was not redone for the remaster. Technically, English voice acting was actually in the original Japanese release of the game. Yes, they had American voice actors, or at least voice actors that spoke English. I'm not sure, but needless to say, when it comes down to it, their voice acting is just... you gotta hear it to know what I'm talking about.
That's far enough, Metal Wolf.
That voice, is that the Eagle of the Atlantic, Brigadier General Robert Forrester?
Your former commander.
Metal Wolf, I don't know what you're up to, or who is inside of there, but I can tell you this, you're public enemy number one.
It's one of those things where you can either appreciate it and laugh with it, or you can cringe about it and just easily forget about it. But even though this, because here's the funny thing, even though the story itself, the voice acting is horrendous, the story isn't really a big part of the game. In fact, if you were to arguably ask me this, could you play this game without actually contributing towards the story and just go through the missions themselves? I would say yes, you could. The game is so inherently fun, you don't even necessarily have to know what's going on within the story. And let's put it this way, there's a lot of politics, and I'm not exactly fond when it comes to politics myself. So, with the gameplay itself though, the gameplay stands out better than what the actual story is. The gameplay, obviously you play as the President being in the mech suit. In the mech suit you actually have an option between 8 or 4, depending on how you set up, of different weapons assortment, and you can switch in between. And you have the option of being able to wield 2 weapons at the same time, or 1 big weapon, depending on the selection. For example, to wield 2 separate weapons, you just pick either between a machine gun, assault rifle, handgun, shotgun. Basically, that's how you wield 2 weapons at the same time. For one of the bigger guns, you have the railgun, the flamethrower, much less the rifle. With that being taken into place, essentially, you have this weird and at the same time interesting build up for your mech suit, because while you can't actually customize the mech itself, you can, however, customize the options of weapons that you can use. Preferably, and I'm going to tell you this because this is how you can get through the game relatively easy, but the best way is to contribute to like 4 slots of machine gun, or 2 machines and 2 assault, depending on your options. But the reason why I say that is because those actually help when it comes to using ammunition. You have the same type of ammunition with machine guns, with handguns, with assault rifles, to that of like railguns and stuff like that. You have light, medium, and heavy ammunition. And so with that being said, you've got different types of ammo for the different types of weapons that you're going to be using. But if you have number of assault rifles or different assortments of machine guns, you're able to actually wield that much more ammunition in your disposal, and you'll actually have a little bit more room in case you run out. Shotguns are pretty useful, but only if you're having to deal with a large amount of enemies up close. Rifles would be best used for whenever you're having to target something from afar, which I'll get to that in a little bit of a detail. Flamethrowers are really good when it comes to taking down big machines or big towers for that matter. Then of course you've got rocket launchers, grenade launchers. Personally, the rocket launchers are better than the grenade launcher. The grenade launchers, I feel like they would only work best if like the enemy is extremely up close, which depending on the enemy can deficiate. And then of course the railgun is really good whenever you have a completely fully charged to blast one big tank or one big tower out of the field. Just like as soon as it really charges, like boom, completely gone. And so with that being said, the gameplay is extremely entertaining, you know. It's that if you're a big fan of mech fighting games, this is one of those games that is really entertaining to play through and stuff. However though, aside from all of that, there is a small portion of the game that can be somewhat completed. Now I say somewhat completed because aside from it having achievement and trophy support, it also has its own completion form as well. You have 2 segments. You have the first segment, which is basically the collectibles inside the games, and then you have the funding part of the game, basically where after you beat each level you have like money and materials in order to make other weapons and stuff. So those are basically 2 types of completion form of things. With the first part being that the collectibles in between levels, you have 2 forms of completion wise. You have rescuing of POWs and energy pods. Now, why would you want to do any of those 2 things? Well, the energy pods, for every 5 energy pods you collect, you gain an extra health gauge or energy gauge, depending on how you want to phrase it. And these energy gauges allows you to increase your stamina in terms of the mech health. But aside from the energy pods, the POWs actually contribute a little bit when it comes to beating each individual level and in terms of increasing funds and stuff. For example, for every scientist that gets saved, you increase the amount of materials that you get at the end of each level. For every musician you save, you get a bit of a soundtrack that you can listen to when you beat endgame. And then of course, when all POWs, all civilians are saved, your overall income increase when you beat each level. So in other words, rescuing every POW actually benefits you when it comes to getting funds and rare materials in order to do the development and manufactures of your weapons. And that's where we get to the second part of the completion aspect. The investments is basically where you develop weapons in order to make weapons. Basically, it allows the expansion of like what weapons you can potentially make in the long run. And the development, being that of manufacture, means you create the weapon itself. So in other words, say for example, your development for a rocket launcher is like at level 5, meaning that the particular weapon that you've just recently received when developing that segment, you start to create that weapon. Now the investment wise, the development wise, that only takes up the fun part of it, that only takes up the money portion. Whereas the manufacturer, being that developing the weapon itself, takes up not only the money, but it also takes up the raw materials needed in order to make said weapon. So both kind of contributes to it in between. So at the end of the day, if you're wanting to complete that particular part of the segment, you're going to be replaying through a lot of the individual levels just to complete that segment, which means ultimately it is required to save every POW so that way you can get that much more funds as well as raw materials gotten at the end of each level. The overall game itself. What have I thought about Metal Wolf Chaos? What are my opinions? And is it a good game that I would recommend anyone else to pick up? The answer to that is actually yes, depending on who you are. The story itself, again, is cringy to some, and for some people they may not be a fan of the voice acting, but you can easily play this game, I think in my personal opinion, without actually interacting with the story whatsoever. It's one of those quick games that you can just jump into, play these individual levels, and complete them in their own way, or in your own way, depending. And in terms of the weapons themselves, they are actually really cool to use, and the further you develop the weapons and the more you get to manufacture, the cooler the weapons are, and you can breeze through weapons, or breeze through levels relatively easy. There is one thing, however, I will warn you, and that is later levels of the game will be hard. How hard? Well, yeah, pretty damn hard. So with that being said, I will urge players to grind in the game. It's one of those few games where, yes, it's sort of like Devil May Cry, where you jump in between levels and missions and everything like that, but in actuality, the later missions become harder to play through, so it is required to develop better weapons to where you can actually use better weapons and hopefully get through the stage a little bit better. That and probably skill, depending on who you are, but Metal Wolf Chaos, I would probably give it a 4 out of 5, personally myself. Again, it's not a near perfect game, but it is actually a really fun and entertaining game. Almost sort of like that, rivals that of Medieval in a way. And if you're a fan of mech fighting games, this is one that you should definitely check out if you're a fan of stuff like that. If not, maybe you can kind of step away from it, but it is available. As far as we know, it's only available digitally for both Xbox One and PS4. And the reason why I got this for the PS4, and it's physically here, is simply because of the fact that technically GameStop sold the PlayStation 4 version physically in their stores. So if you're looking for it in terms of collection wise, the only physical way to get it is through the PS4 through GameStop. So, but anyway though guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this review, and I shall see you in the next video. This is BlackCross signing off. Catch you guys later.
He was forced to play the Chinese air who.